Here is something that sounds impossible. A freight train can weigh 18,000 tons. It can be 2 miles long. And when that monster needs to slow down coming off a mountain, the engineer up front does everything he can to avoid touching the brakes. The actual brakes. The pads that clamp onto the wheels. He will go out of his way not to use them for miles at a time on a descent that could kill everyone aboard if he gets it wrong. That sounds insane. Brakes are for stopping. Why would the one person responsible for 18,000 tons of steel refuse to use the very thing designed to stop it? Because he knows something you do not. On a heavy train, the brakes you are picturing are not the thing that saves you. They are the thing that, if you lean on them too hard, gets you killed. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment, letting us know where you're watching from. We want to know who's out there. Start with the problem, because the problem is enormous. A loaded freight train has a staggering amount of momentum. Getting all that weight to slow down means getting rid of energy, and there are only 2 ways to do that. You can turn the energy into friction, rubbing something against the wheels, or you can turn it into something else. The friction way is the obvious way. It is what the brakes in your car do, what the air brakes on every freight car do. A brake shoe clamps against the wheel, and the rubbing turns the train's motion into heat. And there is the whole problem hiding in that one word: heat. When you clamp a brake shoe against a steel wheel on a 2-mile train and hold it there down a long mountain grade, you are dumping a colossal amount of heat into those wheels and shoes. And here is the killer. If you use them too much, they get too hot. And when brake shoes get too hot, they stop working. The heat changes the material of the shoe, and it simply stops gripping. Truckers and railroaders have a name for it: brake fade. The brakes fade away right when you need them most. The shoes are glowing hot. You press harder and nothing happens because you have cooked them. That is not a brake failure in the sense of something snapping. It is worse. The brakes are still there, still clamping, and they have simply stopped doing anything. So a freight train coming down a long grade cannot just ride its brakes the way you might tap yours coming down a hill in a car. Lean on the air brakes the whole way down a mountain, and you will cook them into uselessness halfway down, and now you have a runaway, 18,000 tons, accelerating, with brakes that no longer bite. So how does the train slow down, if not with its brakes? Here is the beautiful part, and it is the answer almost nobody knows. The locomotives at the front slow the train using their own engines backwards. It is called dynamic braking, and it is genuinely clever. A diesel locomotive does not actually drive its wheels with the diesel engine directly. The diesel engine runs a generator, and the electricity from that generator spins electric motors on the axles, called traction motors, and those motors turn the wheels. That is normal running. Now for dynamic braking, the engineer flips that whole arrangement around. He turns those traction motors into generators. Instead of using electricity to turn the wheels, he lets the rolling wheels turn the motors. And here is the trick. It takes force to turn a generator. Anything generating electricity resists being spun. That is just physics. So the moment those motors become generators, the wheels have to fight to turn them. And that fight, that resistance, drags on the wheels and slows the whole train down. The train's own momentum is being used against it, converted into electricity, without a single brake shoe touching a single wheel. But that electricity has to go somewhere, and it is a huge amount of it. So on the roof of the locomotive sits a bank of giant resistors, basically enormous electric heating elements, like the coils in a gigantic toaster, with big fans blowing over them. All the electricity the braking generates gets dumped into those resistors and blown off into the sky as heat. If you have ever stood near a locomotive going downhill and heard a loud roaring whine from the roof, like a jet engine idling, that is it. That is the sound of the train braking itself with no brakes, throwing its own momentum into the air as heat. The engineer controls all of this from the cab with a lever that has 8 notches, almost identical to the throttle. Except this lever does the opposite of the throttle. The higher he sets it, the more electricity he demands from those motors, and the harder they fight the wheels, and the more the train slows. He can dial the braking up and down as smoothly as he likes, holding the train at a steady speed for mile after mile. There is one catch. Dynamic braking only works while the wheels are turning fast enough to spin the motors, so below roughly 6 to 9 miles per hour it fades out, and the engineer has to switch to the air brakes to make the final stop. But for the long, dangerous work of holding a heavy train back on a descent, the dynamic brake does almost all of it. This is why the engineer avoids the real brakes. The dynamic brake has no shoes, no pads, nothing rubbing, so it cannot fade and it barely wears anything out. He can hold the train back with it mile after mile all the way down the mountain, and it never gets tired. The friction AIR brakes, meanwhile, he saves. He keeps them in reserve, cool and ready, for when he actually needs to stop, or for an emergency, because a brake you have not overheated is a brake that will still work when your life depends on it. There's a second reason to save the air too. A freight train's air brakes draw from reservoirs on each car, and if the engineer keeps applying and releasing them, those reservoirs run low and take time to recharge. Lean on them too much, and you can run out of air for the one last big application you desperately need. The dynamic brake spares all of that. And when this system fails, you get one of the most terrifying events in all of railroading, and it proves the whole point. On the 12th of May, 1989, a heavy train came over the top of Cajon Pass in California, a brutal descent. The train was badly overweight, and critically, several of the locomotives had dynamic brakes that were not working. One was completely dead, but its cooling fans were still spinning, which fooled the crew into thinking it was doing its job. So they started down the mountain believing they had far more braking than they actually had. When they realized the train was not slowing and slammed on the air brakes in a panic, it was already too late. Those air brakes, overwhelmed and overheating, could not hold it. The train ran away down the mountain and hit 110 miles per hour before it flew off a curve posted for 35, launching into a suburban street and destroying houses. People died on the train and in their homes. The cause, at its heart, was simple. The dynamic brakes, the ones that were supposed to do the real work of the descent, were not there, and the friction brakes alone were never enough. So that is the secret hiding in plain sight every time you watch a freight train roll down a grade. The engineer is not really braking the way you think. He is turning his locomotives into giant generators, spinning their motors backwards and pouring the train's own energy into the sky as heat, precisely so he does not have to use the brakes. Because on a train that heavy, the friction brakes are not the hero of the story. They are the last resort, held in reserve, saved for the moment nothing else will do. And the engineer who understands that is the one who gets his train down the mountain alive.